How to improve your English. Speaking English is very important. Many people around the world. If you can speak English well. United States. About. According to the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, average American life expectancy at birth was 77.5 years in 2022, 74.8 years for men and 80.2 years for women. This was a gain of 1.1 years from 76.4 years in 2021. But the CDC noted that the new average didn't fully offset the loss of 2.4 years between 2019 and 2021. The health impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and higher overall mortality due to opioid overdoses and suicides were held mostly responsible for the previous drop in life expectancy, 430. The same report stated that the 2022 gains in average U.S. has one of the highest suicide rates among high-income countries, 432. Approximately one-third of the U.S. adult population is obese and another third is overweight, 433. The U.S. healthcare system far outspends that of any other country, measured both in per capita spending and as a percentage of GDP, but attains worse healthcare outcomes when compared to peer countries for reasons that are debated. 434. The United States is the only developed country without a system of universal healthcare. American primary and secondary education, known in the U.S. as K-12, kindergarten through 12th grade, is decentralized. It is operated by state, territorial, and sometimes municipal governments and regulated by the U.S. Department of Education. In general, children are required to attend school or an approved homeschool from the age of 5 or 6, kindergarten or first grade, until they are 18 years old. This often brings students through the 12th grade, the final year of a U.S. high school, but some states and territories allow them to leave school earlier, at age 16 or 17. The U.S. spends more on education per student than any country in the world, 440, an average of $18,614 per year per public elementary and secondary school student in 2020 to 2021. U.S. tertiary or higher education has earned a global reputation. Many of the world's top universities, as listed by various ranking organizations, are in the United States, including 19 of the top 25, 446, 447. American higher education is dominated by state university systems. Although the country's many private universities and colleges enroll about 20% of all American students, local community colleges generally offer coursework and degree programs covering the first 2 years of college study. They often have more open admission policies, shorter academic programs, and lower tuition, 448. As for public expenditures on higher education, the U.S. spends more per student than the OECD average, and Americans spend more than all nations in combined public and private spending, 449. colleges and universities directly funded by the federal government do not charge tuition and are limited to military personnel and government employees. Media is broadly uncensored, with the First Amendment providing significant protections, as reiterated in New York Times Company v. United States, 479. The four major broadcasters in the U.S. are the National Broadcasting Company, NBC, Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS, American Broadcasting Company, ABC, and Fox Broadcasting Company, Fox. About 83% of Americans over age 12 listen to broadcast radio, while about 40% listen to podcasts. 512. As of 2020, there were 15,460 licensed full-power radio stations in the U.S. according to the Federal Communications Commission, FCC. 513. Much of the public radio broadcasting is supplied by NPR, incorporated in February 1970 under the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967, 514. U.S. newspapers with a global reach and reputation include The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and USA Today, 515. About 800 publications are produced in Spanish. Newspapers are privately owned, either by large chains such as Gannett or McClatchy, which own dozens or even hundreds of newspapers, by small chains that own a handful of papers, or, in an increasingly rare situation, by individuals or families, such as the Village Voice in New York City and LA Weekly in Los Angeles. The 5 most popular websites used in the U.S. are Google, YouTube, Amazon, Yahoo, and Facebook, all of them American-owned. As of 2022, the video game market of the United States is the world's largest by revenue, 519. There are 444 publishers, developers, and hardware companies in California alone. The United States is well known for its theater. Mainstream theater in the United States derives from the old European theatrical tradition and has been heavily influenced by the British theater. 521. By the middle of the 19th century, America had created new distinct dramatic forms in the Tom shows, the showboat theater and the minstrel show. 522. The central hub of the American theater scene is Manhattan, with its divisions of Broadway, Off-Broadway, and Off-Off-Broadway. The Tony Awards recognizes excellence in live Broadway theater and are presented at an annual ceremony in Manhattan. The awards are given for Broadway productions and performances. One is also given for regional theater. Several discretionary non-competitive awards are given as well, including a special Tony Award, the Tony Honors for Excellence in Theater, and the Isabel Stevenson Award. American folk music encompasses numerous music genres, variously known as traditional music, traditional folk music, contemporary folk music, or roots music. Many traditional songs have been sung within the same family or folk group for generations, and sometimes trace back to such origins as the British Isles, mainland Europe, or Africa. 532. The rhythmic and lyrical styles of African American music in particular have influenced American music. 533. Banjos were brought to America through the slave trade. Elements from folk idioms such as the blues and old-time music were adopted and transformed into popular genres with global audiences. Jazz grew from blues and ragtime in the early 20th century, developing from the innovations and recordings of composers such as W. C. Handy and Jelly Roll Morton. Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington increased its popularity early in the 20th century. 537. Country music developed in the 1920s. The United States has the world's largest music market with a total retail value of $15.9 billion in 2022, 543. Most of the world's major record companies are based in the U.S. They are represented by the Recording Industry Association of America, RIA. Early settlers were introduced by Native Americans to foods such as turkey, sweet potatoes, corn, squash, and maple syrup. Of the most enduring and pervasive examples are variations of the native dish called succotash. Early settlers and later immigrants combined these with foods they were familiar with, such as wheat flour, 574, beef, and milk, to create a distinctive American cuisine. 575, 576, New World crops, especially pumpkin, corn, potatoes, and turkey as the main course are part of a shared national menu on Thanksgiving, when many Americans prepare or purchase traditional dishes to celebrate the occasion. The most popular spectator sports in the U.S. are American football, basketball, baseball, soccer, and ice hockey. 601, while most major U.S. sports such as baseball and American football have evolved out of European practices, basketball, volleyball, skateboarding, and snowboarding are American inventions, many of which have become popular worldwide. The history of the lands that became the United States began with the arrival of the first people in the Americas around 15,000 BC. Numerous indigenous cultures formed. After European colonization of North America began. In the late 15th century, wars and epidemics decimated indigenous societies. Starting in 1585, the British Empire colonized the Atlantic coast, and by the 1760s, the history of the lands that became the United States began with the arrival of the first people in the Americas around 15,000 BC. Numerous indigenous cultures formed. After European colonization of North America began in the late 15th century, wars and epidemics decimated indigenous societies. Starting in 1585, the British Empire colonized the Atlantic coast, and by the 1760s. In 1776, in Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress declared the independence of the colonies as the United States of America. Led by General George Washington, it won the Revolutionary War in 1783. The Treaty of Paris established the borders of the new sovereign state. The Articles of Confederation, while establishing a central government, was ineffectual at providing stability. A convention wrote a new constitution that was adopted in 1789, and a Bill of Rights was added in 1791 to guarantee inalienable rights. Washington, the first president, and his advisor Alexander Hamilton created a strong central government. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 doubled the size of the country. Encouraged by available, inexpensive land and the notion of manifest destiny, the country expanded to the Pacific coast. After 1830, Indian tribes were forcibly removed to the west. The resulting expansion of slavery was increasingly controversial, and fueled political and constitutional battles which were resolved by compromises. Slavery was abolished in all states north of the Masons-Dixon line by 1804, but it continued in southern states to support their agricultural economy. After the election of Abraham Lincoln as president in 1860, southern states seceded from the Union to form the pro-slavery Confederate States of America, and started the Civil War. The Confederates' defeat in 1865 led to the abolition of slavery. In the subsequent Reconstruction era, legal and voting rights were extended to freed male slaves. The national government emerged much stronger, and gained explicit duty to protect individual rights. White Southern Democrats regained their political power in the South in 1877, often using paramilitary suppression of voting and Jim Crow laws to maintain white supremacy, as well as new state constitutions that legalized racial discrimination and prevented most African Americans from participating in public life. The United States became the world's leading industrial power in the 20th century, due to entrepreneurship, industrialization, and the arrival of millions of immigrant workers and farmers. A national railroad network was completed, and large-scale mines and factories were established. Dissatisfaction with corruption, inefficiency, and traditional politics stimulated the progressive movement, leading to reforms including the federal income tax, direct election of senators, citizenship for many indigenous people, alcohol prohibition. The United States declared war on Germany in 1917, joining the successful Allies. After the prosperous Roaring Twenties, the Wall Street crash of 1929 marked the onset of the decade-long worldwide Great Depression. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal programs, including unemployment relief and Social Security, defined modern American liberalism. 1. Following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States entered World War II and financed the Allied war effort, helping defeat Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy in the European theater. In the Pacific War, America defeated Imperial Japan after using nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Spaniards then rediscovered America in 1492. After a period of exploration sponsored by major European states, the first successful English settlement was established in 1607. Europeans brought horses, cattle, and hogs to the Americas and, in turn, took back maize, turkeys, tomatoes, potatoes, tobacco, beans, and squash to Europe. Many explorers and early settlers died after being exposed to new diseases in the Americas. However, the effects of new Eurasian diseases carried by the colonists, especially smallpox and measles, were much worse for the Native Americans, as they had no immunity to them. They suffered epidemics and died in very large numbers, usually before large-scale European settlement began. Their societies were disrupted and hollowed out by the scale of deaths. Spanish explorers were the first Europeans, after the Norse, to reach the present-day United States, after Christopher Columbus's expeditions, beginning in 1492, established possessions in the Caribbean, including the modern-day U.S. territories of Puerto Rico, and parts of the U.S. Virgin Islands. Juan Ponce de Leon landed in Florida in 1513. 26. Spanish expeditions quickly reached the Appalachian Mountains, the Mississippi River, the Grand Canyon, 27, and the Great Plains, 28. After Abraham Lincoln won the 1860 election, 7 Southern states seceded from the Union and formed a sovereign state, the Confederate States of America, Confederacy, on February 8, 1861, 126. The Civil War began on April 12, 1861, when Confederate forces attacked a U.S. military installation at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. In response, Lincoln called on the states to send troops to recapture forts, protect Washington, D.C., and preserve the Union, which in his view still existed despite the secession. 127. Lincoln's call led to 4 more states seceding and joining the Confederacy. A few of the northernmost slave states did not secede and became known as the border states. These were Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. Citation needed. During the war, the northwestern portion of Virginia seceded from the Confederacy, which became the new Union state of West Virginia. Spanish explorers were the first Europeans, after the Norse, to reach the present-day United States, after Christopher Columbus's expeditions, beginning in 1492, established possessions in the Caribbean, including the modern-day U.S. territories of Puerto Rico, and parts of the U.S. Virgin Islands. Juan Ponce de Leon landed in Florida in 1513. 26. Spanish expeditions quickly reached the Appalachian Mountains, the Mississippi River, the Grand Canyon, 27, and the Great Plains, 28. The autumn 1862 Confederate retreat at the Battle of Antietam led to Lincoln's warning he would issue the Emancipation Proclamation in January 1863 if the states did not return. Making slavery a central war goal energized Northern Republicans, as well as their enemies, the anti-war Copperhead Democrats. It ended the chance of British and French intervention. 131. Lee's smaller Army of Northern Virginia won battles in late 1862 and spring 1863, but he pushed too hard and ignored the Union threat in the West. He invaded Pennsylvania in search of supplies and to cause war weariness in the North. 133. The Emancipation Proclamation was an executive order issued by Lincoln on January 1, 1863. It freed 3 million slaves in designated areas of the Confederacy. The owners were not compensated. Plantation owners, realizing that emancipation would destroy their economic system, sometimes moved their slaves as far as possible from the Union Army. 134. The Civil War was the world's earliest industrial war. Railroads, the telegraph, steamships, and mass-produced weapons were employed extensively. Civilian factories, mines, shipyards, and were mobilized. 135. Foreign trade increased, with the U.S. providing both food and cotton to Britain, and Britain sending in manufactured products and thousands of volunteers for the Union Army, and a few to the Confederate Army. The Union blockade shut down Confederate ports, and by late 1864, the British blockade runners supplying Confederates were usually captured before they could make more than a handful of runs.